The birthday candles were already melting by the time Margaret understood no one was coming home. She stood at the dining table with both hands around the small cake box, lowering it slowly as if the table might move away from her if she rushed. The kitchen light hummed faintly overhead, and she nudged the cake to the center of the table, straightening it until the edges lined up with the wood grain beneath. A chair scraped softly as she pulled it out, not sitting yet, pausing instead to smooth the tablecloth where a fold refused to lie flat. She reached for the candles one by one, setting them upright with care, pressing each base gently into the frosting so they would stand without leaning. When she struck the match, the flame flared too brightly for a second, and she blinked, holding it steady until the first wick caught. The other candles followed, small points of light gathering in a loose circle, and she watched them closely, counting without moving her lips. From the hallway came the sound of a door closing somewhere else in the house, and she turned her head just enough to listen. Nothing followed, so she looked back at the cake, adjusting the candles again as if their spacing mattered more than anything else. She checked the clock on the microwave, then checked it again a moment later, standing in the same spot while the seconds slipped past. The front door stayed closed, and she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, feeling the cold floor through the soles of her shoes. She reached for the lighter this time instead of another match, flicking it once, then twice, though the candles were already burning. The flames wavered as a draft passed through the kitchen, and she lifted one hand to shield them, palm curved protectively in the warm air. A car passed outside, its headlights sliding briefly across the wall, and she turned toward the window, waiting for the sound to slow. The sound did not slow, and the light disappeared, leaving the room exactly as it was before. She pulled the chair back another inch and finally sat, keeping her back straight, her hands resting on the table where they could feel the warmth from the candles. The ticking of the clock grew louder, or maybe she noticed it more now, each second landing clearly in the quiet. She leaned forward slightly, as if someone might still appear at the doorway if she stayed ready. When no one did, she reached up and tucked a strand of gray hair behind her ear, the movement practiced and small. The candles burned lower, thin trails of wax beginning to slide down their sides, and she watched one drip onto the frosting near the edge. She touched the spot with the tip of her finger, then wiped it on her napkin, folding the napkin carefully afterward. From the living room came the murmur of a television turning on, voices rising and falling without direction, and she stayed where she was. She looked at the empty chairs around the table, counting them without meaning to, stopping when she reached the one nearest the door. Her shoulders lifted slightly as footsteps passed by in the hallway, then settled again when the footsteps did not stop. Someone laughed at something on the television, the sound brief and unconnected, and she kept her eyes on the candles. The flames dipped and flared again, smaller now, and she drew a slow breath, letting it out through her nose. She did not blow the candles out, not yet, keeping her hands flat against the table instead. The kitchen clock clicked over to the next minute, and she noticed the change by the way the light reflected off its surface. She straightened the edge of the cake box, though it no longer needed it, and adjusted the chair again, pulling it closer. The front door opened somewhere else in the house, voices entering with it, louder than before, and she turned her head quickly this time. The voices moved past the kitchen without slowing, their words blending together as they went, and the door closed again. She faced the table once more, lowering her gaze to the candles, which were now uneven, their tops bent and shining. One candle tipped, falling against the frosting, and she lifted it carefully, setting it upright again, though it no longer stood straight. Wax pooled at the base of the candles, spreading into a soft ring, and she watched it reach the edge of the cake. She pressed her lips together, not tightly, just enough to hold them in place. The television volume increased slightly, then dropped again, and she listened to the rise and fall without turning. She reached into her pocket and drew out a small folded card, smoothing it once before placing it beside the cake. The card stayed unopened, its blank side facing up, and she aligned it with the edge of the table. The candles flickered, one going out on its own, leaving a thin line of smoke that drifted upward and vanished. She watched the smoke until it was gone, then looked at the remaining flames, which continued to shrink. Her hands moved together on the table, fingers interlacing briefly before separating again. The kitchen light buzzed, and she glanced up at it, then back down, as if checking that it was still there. She sat without moving while another candle went dark, then another, each one leaving the cake a little dimmer than before. By the time the last candle sputtered and faded, the wax had spread unevenly across the frosting, and the cake no longer looked like it had when she set it down. She waited a moment longer, eyes on the place where the flame had been, as if something else might appear. When nothing did, she reached out and switched off the light above the table, leaving only the glow from the hallway. The cake sat in the half-light, quiet and unchanged, and she rose slowly from her chair. She lifted the cake box lid, sliding it back over the cake without brushing the frosting, and closed it carefully. The folded card went into her pocket again, untouched, and she pressed it flat against her leg before standing straight. She pushed the chair back into place, making sure its legs lined up with the others. The sounds from the living room continued, steady and indifferent, and she did not pause to listen. She carried the cake toward the refrigerator, holding it level, and placed it on the middle shelf where it would not be disturbed. The refrigerator door closed with a soft seal, and she rested her hand there for a second longer than necessary. She turned away and reached for a dish towel, wiping the table where the wax had dripped, folding the towel when she was done. The clock on the wall showed the hour clearly now, and she adjusted it slightly, though it had not been wrong. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking back at the empty table, then reached up and turned off the kitchen light completely. The hallway light remained on, casting a long shadow across the floor, and she stepped around it as she walked. She passed the living room without stopping, eyes forward, the sound of voices fading behind her. In her bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed and removed her shoes, placing them neatly side by side. She folded her sweater and laid it over the back of the chair, smoothing the sleeves so they would not hang. The room felt cooler without the kitchen warmth, and she pulled a shawl around her shoulders before standing again. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark street, the porch light across the way already turned off. A breeze moved the curtain slightly, and she adjusted it so it would fall back into place. She returned to the bed and sat again, hands folded in her lap, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed, followed by the low murmur of voices behind it. She stayed where she was until the sounds softened and the lights beneath the doors dimmed. When she lay back, she reached for the shawl again, pulling it higher, then letting her hands rest at her sides. The room grew still, the quiet settling in layers, and she closed her eyes without turning off the bedside lamp. In the early hours, before the light outside changed, she woke and sat up, listening for sounds that did not come. She rose quietly, wrapped the shawl around herself, and walked back toward the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed softly as she opened it, the cake waiting on the shelf where she had left it. She took it out and placed it back on the table, removing the lid just enough to see the wax-marked frosting beneath. She did not light the candles again, leaving them as they were, bent and pale. She sat in the same chair as before, resting her hands on the table, facing the place where the candles had burned down. As the morning light crept into the room, she adjusted the chair slightly so she could see the door. The house remained quiet, unchanged, and she stayed there, waiting, with the cake between her hands as the day began.